The story of the Mad King has been told many times in hushed tones, usually around dim fires or in quiet taverns, but rarely with patience. Most tellers rush through the tale, eager for the strange twist or the haunting details. Yet, like many old stories, this one deserves time. It deserves silence between sentences, so that the air itself can fill with meaning. There was once a king whose name has long been forgotten, though in whispers he is simply called the Glass King. He lived in a castle of stone that rose out of the earth like a clenched fist. The towers pierced the sky, and the walls were as thick as the trunks of the oldest trees. From the outside, his kingdom seemed strong, but within the halls of the castle, unease lingered like a sickness that could not be named. The king was not always strange. Old records say he was once a bright and clever ruler, a man who walked among his people and listened to their troubles. He wore his crown lightly, more as a burden than a symbol. He loved music, he loved laughter, and he loved his daughter, Eleanor, more than anything else in the world. But as time passed, a shadow seemed to fall across him. At first, it was a small thing. He became quieter at feasts. He stared too long at windows. He touched his own hands as though testing their strength. Then, whispers began to spread through the court. The king had grown convinced that his body was made of glass. At first, his advisors laughed gently, thinking it a strange joke. But the king did not laugh. Instead, he spoke in a low, urgent voice. "If I fall," he said, "I will shatter. If you touch me too roughly, I will splinter. My bones are no longer bone. They are glass." His physicians assured him it was impossible. His priests prayed over him. His daughter held his hand and tried to convince him with tears and kisses that he was whole and human. But the fear did not leave him. The king began to walk differently, with short, cautious steps, as if each movement might cause a crack to run through his skin. He wore padded clothing under his robes, soft layers that muffled his figure. His throne was cushioned with pillows, and he leaned upon them as though he were a fragile sculpture that might topple at any moment. It would have been easy to mock him, but no one dared. His fear was so absolute, so overwhelming, that even the hardest-hearted knight could not laugh in his presence. Instead, the people whispered more quietly, and the halls grew quieter still. For Eleanor, his daughter, the days became heavy. She loved her father dearly, but his fear weighed on her like a stone strapped to her chest. She was always at his side, reminding him gently to eat, reminding him to breathe, reminding him that he was safe. She learned to move slowly so as not to startle him. She learned to speak softly so as not to sound like breaking glass. But in private, Eleanor wept. She wanted her father back, the man who once told her stories of brave adventurers, who laughed at her small jokes, who lifted her up in the garden to show her the first stars of evening. Now, she feared to touch him. She feared her love might harm him. Sometimes she dreamed of him standing tall and whole, with his crown shining in the sun. But when she woke, she found him crouched by the fire, his face pale, his hands trembling as he whispered, "I must not fall. I must not break." The story might have ended in sorrow, but life is never so simple. One winter evening, a storm swept across the land. The wind howled against the stone walls, and the snow piled high at the gates. Inside the castle, fires roared, but even their warmth could not chase away the chill that settled in the heart of the king. He sat on his throne, wrapped in heavy robes, staring into the flames as if searching for some secret within them. Beside him stood Eleanor, patient as ever. She was tired, but she did not leave his side. It was then that a traveling musician arrived at the castle doors. He had been caught by the storm, and the guards, taking pity, allowed him to enter. He was a simple man with a fiddle strapped to his back, his clothes patched and worn, but his eyes were kind. When a musician learned of the king's strange fear, he did not laugh or look away. Instead, he bowed low and asked permission to play a song. The king hesitated. His lips trembled. "Music is dangerous," he whispered. "The sound may shatter me." But Eleanor, with her soft courage, touched her father's sleeve. "Father," she said, "music is not sharp. It is gentle. Let it surround you." The king closed his eyes, and after a long pause, he nodded. The musician lifted his fiddle and began to play. The first notes were soft as falling snow, drifting slowly into the silent hall. Then came warmer tones, like the glow of a hearth fire. The sound filled the air, but did not press upon the king. Instead, it carried him, lifted him, like a bird carried by the wind. The king trembled, certain that the music would cause him to break. But as he listened, something strange happened. He imagined, for the first time, that glass was not only fragile. It could also be strong. Glass could bend light. Glass could shine. Glass could hold beauty within it. Tears welled in his eyes, though he did not at first know why. He reached out a trembling hand and touched Eleanor's. She expected him to pull away in fear, but instead he held on, tightly, as though she were the one who might vanish. When the song ended, silence filled the hall. The king sat still for a long time, his face wet with tears, his chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. "I'm glass," he whispered at last. But glass does not only break. Glass endures. From that night forward, the king was not cured. His fear did not vanish overnight, nor did he suddenly return to the man he once had been. But something had changed. He no longer wrapped himself in endless layers of padding. He no longer refused to walk for fear of falling. Instead, he began to move slowly but with purpose, as though he were a vessel carrying light within him. He allowed himself to be touched, to be embraced, to be reminded that he was loved. The people of the kingdom noticed. At first, they whispered again, this time with cautious hope. Then, as the weeks passed, the whispers became songs. They called him not the Mad King, but the Glass King, a man whose body was fragile, but whose spirit shone. Eleanor, for her part, felt the weight lift from her shoulders. She still watched over him, still offered her hand when he trembled, but she no longer felt trapped in sorrow. She saw her father smiling again, not always, but often enough that her heart felt light. Years later, when Eleanor herself was grown and strong, she told her children of her father. She did not speak of him as mad, nor as broken. Instead, she told them of the night when music filled the castle and her father learned that glass could shine as well as shatter. The children listened wide-eyed, and sometimes they asked, but was he ever truly made of glass? And Eleanor would smile, her eyes soft with memory. No, she would say, he was made of flesh and bone, like all of us. But he believed he was glass, and in believing, he suffered. Yet he also discovered something true, that even fragile things can carry light. And when we carry light, we are never broken. And so the story of the Glass King was passed down, not as a tale of madness, but as a lesson in gentleness, patience, and love.